The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies and Coat Dance Paints, and also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Thank you to everyone for your support.
The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 120, At the Sharp End and Dux Britanniarum Raiders, with guest Richard Clarke.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. I'm Neil Shuck, and co-hosting the show with me today is Mike Whitaker. Hello, Mike.
Good evening.
Welcome to the show. Very pleased everyone you can join us. This is yet another one of those, finally, take 300 and something other of attempting to get this show out. My internet woes continue. But it appears to have been solved by the fact I've just moved to the kitchen, which is quite scary. However, technical issues aside, here we are once again. So apologies for the delay in getting the show out. And, of course, everybody who's playing the game, please tick off the appropriate box and take a drink at this point. Look on the blog if you're wondering what the heck on earth I'm talking about. Okay, so this evening, we have an interview for you. Very pleased to be joined by Richard Clarke from Two Fat Lardies. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Neil. Hi, Mike. You'll be glad to know that I haven't yet taken a drink, but it does sound like a very good idea.
Great to have you on the show, Richard. Tonight, obviously, we're going to chat about how things have been going as far as Two Fat Lardies is concerned. There's a couple of new and upcoming releases to chat about, and hopefully we'll chat about a few more general things while we're at it.
So, Rich, how's life in the world of Chain of Command?
Oh, hectic. Very, very busy. Yeah, it's been it was a colossal launch at the end of last summer, and it's just been hugely busy. I just had to run up to Nottingham yesterday to a couple of distributors who emailed me and said, "Help, we've run out of supplies again." So
that's not a bad sign, though. Both run out and again.
No. Well, I was only there a week ago. That's in fact one of them sent me an email which was entitled "Bloody hell!" ! And he said, "I need more boxes." So it's one of those interesting things when you release a set of rules. You're never quite sure what pattern you're going to get. You're always going to get an initial spike of sales because obviously once you've got customers who know what to expect, if they like what you do, they're very likely to be interested in purchasing it. And then the question is, how long does the spike go on for? And then does it die off and you get a flat trough? Well, it was interesting. What happened this time was we had this spike and then it dies off and dies down as it does. And you're really waiting for the people to get some figures painted up and get them down to their local club and put the toys on the table and get the games going. And then what you're going to get is a reaction to whether people like the rules or not. And it's all very well your mates saying, "Oh, I really enjoy these rules that you've written," and whatever, but this is honesty staring you in the face. And then the great thing was that all of a sudden we had this second sort of wave, and it's never really stopped. And we've just found that it's obviously been the most successful launch we've ever had, even better than Dux. Dux Britanniarum was a big launch for us, but certainly this has been actually like nothing else we've seen before. So that's been fantastic.
And I guess at that size it's a big risk as well, is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's always a financial risk. I mean, I went into it. I think I had £10 in my pocket when I commissioned everything. So financially, we have to make the money back within 30 days because we're on 30-day terms with the printer and all the other suppliers. But so it's always a risk. But to be honest, that's nothing new. We're used to that. We do that every time we release a set of rules. And the thing is that over the years, the risk element has grown up and developed. I mean, in the old days when we were producing black and white sets of rules, you were looking at much shorter print runs. So you'd probably be looking at in costs of less than £5,000. So you think, okay, well, I'll take a risk with £5,000, and you hope you're going to get your money back because sales are good. Obviously, now that the front end costs are a lot higher because we have lots of things like the jump-off markers with chain of command, we've got the tokens, we've got bits and bobs, with Dux Britanniarum, it was the cards. So all these are adding to the front end costs. But at the same time, we've been selling rules for 12 years now, and we've got an established customer base who like what we do, and we work very closely with them while we're developing sets of rules. And during the beta test process, you know if you've got a turkey or if you've got something that's going to work, and if you've got a turkey, you don't back it. So, yeah, I mean there's an element of risk, but that's business, isn't it? Really, it's no different to the 30 talents, is it, in the Bible? You take them and try and make them grow by investing in something that brings you a return, which hopefully then will fund you moving towards the next set of rules. Because you've obviously got a development period of about, intense playtesting, 9 months to a year. So what your rules sales are paying for is not so much what you've just coughed up on getting things produced. It's paying for the next year while you're developing the next product.
Do you see that the spikes are in any way connected with things like putting out new army lists and the like, or do you ever feel what's actually causing this recent spike? Is that actually the campaign supplement?
Oh Christ! Well, obviously we've just produced the Chain of Command at the sharp end campaign supplement, and it's a bit early to give precise figure breakdown on everything. The biggest launch we've had of any supplement we've done. And there's a lot of people who may think, at 10 quid I'd be tempted, but I'm not going to do it. But at 6 quid it's less than the price of a couple of pints, so I will give it a go and see what it is. But what we've definitely found in, how long is it now? 4 days since we released? Maybe 5, 6 days, I don't know. But what we've certainly found is we've got an awful lot of people who bought at the sharp end and who've now come back and are buying Chain of Command the rules. So one thing feeds off the other. It's not necessarily one-way traffic.
That was a very interesting comment you made about the fact that people are buying at the sharp end and then coming back and buying Chain of Command. Especially considering, at the sharp end is very much said, okay, this is a supplement for a campaign supplement for Chain of Command. You think it's one of those things that, because it's turned out as a campaign supplement and it's at the price point it is, that in itself is just attracting customers?
I certainly think we are seeing lots, because obviously we can track all these figures on the website. It's not something I have as much time to do. Certainly what we are seeing is that we are getting people actively purchasing that and then coming back for the Chain of Command rules. Yes, certainly. And is it because of the price point? Well, I think the price point may be the first thing that gets them into it. But I do think very definitely. I mean, the one thing I will say about Chain of Command at the sharp end is that it's putting campaign supplement on the front is a bit of a misnomer, really. I should really have called it a campaign handbook. And I do try and refer to it as that, because what it isn't is a supplement where you buy it and then put your figures on the table and start playing your campaign for Arnhem or your campaign for the attack on Sanlo. It's not a standalone single campaign. What it is a handbook on how to run campaigns with Chain of Command. You get a variety of types of campaigns that you can run, and it's a handbook that will provide all the basic rules for you. and then allow you to take it from there. So it's very much a specific product that stands alone, in as much as you can't do anything else with it. It does what it does, and that's that. It's not multi-purpose. Whereas I think people have looked at that and said, actually, in order to get the best out of this, I think Chain of Command are possibly an interesting set of rules that I would want to use it with, because whilst it is generic in some respects, any campaign system should work with any set of rules. There are some aspects in there which are specifically designed to work with Chain of Command, because that's the game system it's written for.
The thing that actually mystifies me a bit from that point of view is that we are, I think, like it or not, a lot of wargamers are a bit instant gratification. And the one thing at the sharp end, okay, it can be, but there's clearly bits of at the sharp end that say, and if you want to do it this way, you're going to have to put in a bit of work. And I'm quite pleased in a way that people seem to be responding to that with, oh yeah, I could, rather than, I don't want to do that.
That's an important point, and that's something that I thought long and hard about before producing it. And the best thing to do is to give a little bit of detail here, is to provide people with 3 options for the types of campaigns they can run. Now, there is the no map campaign, which, as it says, has no map. And basically, it's run on a ladder. And if you succeed in one scenario, you move up the ladder. If you fail in the next scenario, you move down the ladder. And that rung of the ladder you are on determines what scenario you're going to be playing next. Now, that's very, very simple, and you can take that straight out of the box and just play that. And in there it says, right, move on to the next scenario. That is scenario 3 from the main rules, and this is how to set up the terrain, and here's any special rules that we use for it in a campaign. Now, that is straight out the box. You can just pick that up, and you can be playing with that within half an hour. The second option is what we call the simple map campaign, and all of these are well illustrated, so you can see how we've done it. And a simple map campaign would be where you, as a gamer, just get an idea in your head that, okay, well, my end objective is going to be a bridge over the River Odon, and the area before that is going to be some farmland, so you get a little sketch map out and you draw a couple of hills and a bit of a tree, and the area before that, where the main line of defences are, is going to be a little village, and the outpost line is going to be farmstead, and no man's land in between the 2 front lines is going to be a river or a swamp or a mountain or whatever. And then all you've got to do there is, and you can use any source for that. You could just read an account which says we fought the way through this farm, then we fought our way into the town, and then we did this and then we did that. And you can take first-hand accounts, and within half an hour you can knock up a little sketch map and you're good to go. And that uses, obviously, all the common campaign mechanisms that are in there. Now, the third and final option is where we're saying, well, look, if you want to put a bit of effort into it, why not book out the library? Why not go online and see if you can find some, maps of the area, and why not put together something a little bit more complicated yourself? You don't have to spend a long time on it. Don't have to spend a lot of money on it. There's an example in there that I use where I bought 2 or 3 books. Another book that I had on my shelves. I bought a map online, and you spend 30 quid on researching something, and you can put together a campaign which is going to give you, many, many hours of fun and replayability. So there are 3 options, and none of them are favoured over the others. If you want to go for simple, no setup time, in you go, jump in, and away you go and play your games. But it is a handbook, as I said earlier. So it does tell you how to build your own campaigns if you want to do a little bit more historical research. When a pal of mine down in Australia, one of our Lard ambassadors, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later on, he said he got that together and he put together his campaign in an evening. He just sat down, found the information he wanted from the different books, and that's the most complicated campaign that there is. So there is that element of instant satisfaction But no, it also offers lots of other options. And I was very concerned, actually, thinking, are we in an age now where you can produce something which isn't entirely about instant gratification? And thank God the response has been incredibly positive. And a lot of people that I would have thought would have gone for the no map simplest option are saying, actually, I read that book and I really, obviously triggered something in their mind, and they want to go away and put together a little campaign based on that. Now, they might not want to do the full historical research. They might want to do something that has, the feel of it without the effort. Well, then they've got the central simple map campaign that they can just draw a little sketch map, and they're still good to go. And all the other campaign mechanisms are common to all three types of campaign. So the system can be run with the simplest or the most complex of campaign without any changes.
Yeah, it strikes me immediately. It's one of these things that it's an ideal companion piece. For example, if you've got the any of the Battleground Europe books, for example,
absolutely.
These are really kind of off the shelf, quick bit of history, quick bit of research, some nice little maps to do, but for a minimal outlay, and to be honest, just a small amount of research that can get you up and going with lots and lots and lots of different ideas, and that seems to go hand in glove with something like at the sharp end.
Absolutely right. I mean, I did quite a bit of battlefield walking and Battleground Europe and the what are the other ones called? Battlefield Normandy, I think. Those books very much are instant fix to work with at the sharp end, because they've even got lots of period maps in there. In fact, funnily enough, I, through my research, discovered the company who they get their maps from to use in their books, and I use the same people. You can pick up a 1 to 25,000 map of Normandy, and you've got a map at platoon level which can be used for numerous campaigns. If you just take the villages around Caen, you could run a dozen campaigns on one map, which you buy in JPEG format for 12 quid. So it's fantastic value for money.
So I was noting that one of the things you were doing with the full map campaign is effectively taking your 25,000 map and what I guess must be a scale 6x4 table and just plonking it down on what looks like a likely place and using that to inform how you set out the scenery.
That's true, although obviously what I've done there is taken historical accounts which says we ran into the German outposts here and we then hit the main German defences here and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, how you configure the table, whether you have it diagonally, rectangularly, horizontally, you've got to then look at that map and go, what's going to make the nicest game, really? Which is
absolutely
is that a fudge? I don't think it is really. It's if it is a fudge, it's the type of fudge that's done for the right reason. But you are still using the right historical terrain.
Taking a slight step back from that, I mean, the one thing I found it interesting, and this is, I suppose, where it had a big difference. I know right from the off, when Chain of Command came out, there were many people looking at another product that you produce called Platoon Forward, and saying, okay, how can we adapt this campaign book into Chain of Command? And having now seen the sharp end, certainly from you can see kind of where things are similar, but also where things are very different. Now, so one thing, for example, with like say Platoon Forward, for people who don't know it, the one thing it does do, for example, it stipulates a whole host of scenarios and gives you board layouts and various other bits and pieces.
Yeah,
and that's obviously something that you don't do at the sharp end. Is there a particular reason why you jumped down either route?
Well, I didn't Platoon Forward. Joe Legan wrote Platoon Forward. For me, I think the two are mutually compatible. Platoon Forward is very much focused being a scenario generator. At the sharp end is about being a campaign management system. there are aspects where you get some crossover, but actually the crossover is quite small. Both of them look at the individuals that we're talking about. So at the sharp end, I'm looking at what is the background of this officer. Where does he come from? How tall is he? Is he short, fat, thin, whatever? Has he got spectacles? So I'm looking at those sort of details, whereas in Platoon Forward, Joe looks at things from a more, I think, role-playing point of view. So what are this individual's motivations? You know, what inspires this person? What are they motivated by? Now, there's very little crossover there at all. Joe's got a very small section on what's this person's background. You know, have they come up through the ranks or have they done whatever? Whereas I've got a very large section on that. You know, I've got four pages containing 8 tables for the 4 main nationalities of the war, whereas Joe's got 1 roll of d6 and that's it. So where there is crossover, it's quite marginal. It's a bit like the Olympic rings, if you like. You get that area where you are getting some kind of crossover, but I think the two work together very well. What I couldn't do, because ultimately this is all about providing people with the tools to create scenarios which are based on, you know, what they read about and so on and so forth. There's no point in having a scenario generator in there, because if you've taken the village of Le Port and you're a German counterattacking on D-Day, well, then the next battlefield is going to be Pegasus Bridge, because that's what's next. And so there's no point in me creating a scenario generator in the campaign generating system, although the campaign generating system does say, here we go, here's the key 6 scenarios which are in the rules, and this is how to use them. So that the scenarios are covered in there, but they're done because the whole thing works very much in them with the main rules. Joe's Platoon Forward, on the other hand, is, I think, much more of a scenario generator, and then links those games together as a campaign without actually using a map. It has a series of linked games, whereas what I've done is say you've got a series of games which are linked by the terrain that you're fighting over, and that's 2 different approaches. But you can definitely use the 2 and add a load more detail. I mean, if you could find out so much more about the characters that you've got on the tabletop by combining what Platoon Forward does with what I've done with at the sharp end. Again, at the sharp end, where that focuses, particularly in the post-game area, it focuses on the 3 key areas which are potentially going to affect how the rules work in the next game.
Yeah.
So what your commanding officer thinks of you and how your platoon is doing will determine how much support you get or don't get for the next mission. What your men think of you will determine how good their force morale is for the next mission. And as you know, force morale is an important factor during each game's play. And what the leader, the platoon commander, which is basically you as the player, think of yourself, how you perceive yourself, that can affect everybody around you and also affect what is going on the tabletop. So those 3 things are linked very much to the rules, rather than being a sort of role-playing system which allows you to go off down different alleyways and develop characters in a lot of different ways. I didn't really think that was what I wanted to do with At the Sharp End. I wanted to tell you, okay, let's have a snapshot of who your characters are, because I think it's important when playing a game, if you know that sergeant is Fred Bloggs from Sheffield, who's 38 years old and was previously working in the steelworks, that's just enough background for you to start relating to that individual. What then becomes more interesting is whether he gets the military medal or, mentioned in dispatches, and you start having characters developing based on how good they are in battle, what they're doing on the tabletop.
And we've clearly demonstrated that works with Dux as well. Superbly.
Yeah,
so.
Well, it's very much there's very much a sort of family tree lineage going back to the Dux campaign thing, because as you know, Mike, from playing Dux Britanniarum a lot.
Oh yeah.
Really, It doesn't matter whether Aelfric is a drunkard who comes from
That's Leofric, but never mind.
a marsh off the coast of northern Germany. Yeah, but you know what I mean. It doesn't really matter, but
no.
it does become important to you because that is part of weaving everything into this narrative and this story that makes it interesting, and it also means you don't throw away the lives of your men.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Heartlessly, because
it makes you care, which you should be doing.
Care, which you should. Yeah, I totally agree.
Backtracking to Chain of Command itself, you've been, I guess, having sales pick up as a result of Sharp End is nothing but a good thing. But I was noting, looking through a few of the TMP reviews, people having a bit of a moan because they reckon Chain of Command is complicated, and I'm curious as to your take on that because I'm baffled. Because as far as I can see, and don't take this as a slight on Chain of Command, the core mechanics are your typical bucket of dice, one dice per figure combat system. There are only so many ways of doing it. It's not a wheel. You can do many clever things. The only trickiness and brilliance is the activation system, and I find it hard to consider that as complicated.
I have to say, I do think that this is something that we're seeing generally in the hobby, with people having a very low benchmark for what they think is complicated and involved. The way we designed Chain of Command was to make many of the key aspects of the rules to be completely simple so that they were absolutely intuitive. For example, if you have one man firing a rifle, he rolls one dice. And as you say, there's not so many ways, you can do on that. And obviously different weapons have slightly different firepower levels. So if a guy's firing a Bren gun, then, if you've got a Bren team firing a Bren gun, they're going to be rolling 6 dice. But essentially, as you say, it's one man, 1d6. Movement system, very, very simple. You've got 3 levels of movement. You move tactically, or you move and shoot, which means you ain't going to move very far, or you move normally, which means you're going to go an average distance, or you run like hell, which means you are going to likely go a little bit further than you would have done if you'd done either of the other two. So there's nothing particularly complicated in that. The only area...
Although you could make the argument that there is a complexity in rolling dice to move, I have to say, I think my comment to that is, did you never play Ludo?
Well, yeah, exactly. Or, Snakes and Ladders.
Yeah,
you roll the dice
exactly.
moving Snakes and Ladders, and I think even I could manage Snakes and Ladders.
I was going to say, there are some people who appear to have a fundamental dislike of random movement. Because
there are.
Because it is a case of, excuse me, if I have a movement value of 6 inches, surely that means I should be able to move 6 inches at all times, unless, of course, I'm changing the ground in which I'm travelling.
Mind that rock. Look out for the tree root. Watch out for the rabbit hole.
Well, and more to the point, watch out for that German bloke shooting at you. I can fully understand that there are people out there who do not like the concept of troops not doing exactly what they want them to do and what they expect them to do every time. This is really very much a case of different character types. There are some people who like to be in control of everything that is going on that tabletop so that they are within their comfort zone. I actually had a letter from a guy, an American officer in Afghanistan this week, who said to me, I can really, really reflect on my experiences here about what you are doing with the rules. He said, I have seen units, I've seen squads of men stand and fight or simply run away based on the quality of their leadership. He understood what we're saying with the variable movement rates, because what we're really saying is you might want your men to run across that field at top speed, but you don't know that they are going, how fast they're going to do that, because they might not be that enthusiastic about it. Now, what you do know is that you're going to be rolling 1d6 or 2d6 or 3d6. Now, laws of probability should inform you how far you are likely to go. And certainly when you're rolling 2 or 3 d6, you are going to get a curve which gives you the most likely results. It's very unlikely when you're rolling 2d6 that you're going to go 2 inches or 12 inches. It's far more likely you're going to go 7 inches or 8 inches or 6 inches. And I think that's realistic. You know, as an NCO commanding a section, you look there and think, are we going to make it? My only answer to that is that whenever that I've talked to people who've been in the military, ex-military people, about the way this works, they all go, I fully understand absolutely what you're talking about, and you are absolutely right. However, you can still say that to wargamers who like to be in absolute control of every situation, and they won't accept it. So you think, well, there you go. Don't buy the rules if you don't like that. It's a bit like don't buy chocolate if you don't like chocolate.
One of the interesting things I noticed, and if you've read my blog, as I think quite a few listeners now have, on probability and the like, one of the things I find with the dice-based movement is it does sort out the people who are willing to take risks from those who aren't. Because, for example, the average roll on 3 dice is just over 10. But you only have a 50-50 chance of making that. If you need to be 10 inches, you've only got a 50-50 chance. If you want a 90% chance, and it's more than 7 inches, forget it. And it's quite interesting how that sorts out the people who will go, I've only got about a 50-50 chance of making that, and who will, at this point, try a slightly more cautious approach to those who will go, 90% certainty, let's go.
Well, absolutely right. And if you don't want to run across that field, move tactically.
Hell yeah.
You know, the options are all there. You know, if you don't want to run like that, then take the option of moving tactically. Take the option of leaving your machine gun team there and putting suppressive fire down while you sneak forward with your rifle team. Put smoke down. These are all decisions that leaders are faced with in combat. They are never faced with a situation where they go, I know that I can get from A to B because that's what my movement rate is.
I've found it quite interesting opening a couple of people's eyes at the club recently, pointing out that if you're standing behind a hedge and blasting away, you get just as much cover by advancing, moving tactically.
Yes, you do. Absolutely right.
With someone else hanging back in support.
All these things about people taking risks is absolutely right. Do you want to take a risk? By all means do so, but you don't have to. There are other ways of achieving the same end. You've just got to make that command decision that leader would have to make in the field. Now, guys who take risks potentially win Victoria Crosses, but they also potentially die. And that is reflected on what you roll on the D6, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's great. I think that's why I come to really like the random movement mechanic, simply because it does give you that feeling of not being quite in control as well. In that, you're ordering perfectly rational human beings who are looking down the barrel of an MG-34 and going, get lost.
Yeah, well, that's right. And if I was writing rules for mechanized robots who had no soul or sense of, self-preservation, well, maybe robot, set your leg speed to 100 yards a minute. Then maybe I wouldn't use that mechanism, but I'm not. I'm writing rules in this instance about men who are thinking, oh my God, is he going to tell us to run across that field? And if so, am I going to be the one leaping up and streaking out ahead of the rest? Or am I going to be the one thinking, well, let's hang on here for a bit longer? What I would say is, is that what people are really talking about when they say the rules are complex? I don't think that is the bit that they think is complex. The bit that I think that people might think is complex is the command and control dice, but I don't think it's complex. I think it's just different. Certainly my experience is that people, when you play a game, can pick that up very, very rapidly. But I do think that there's a lot of people who have come into the hobby now who come from a different sort of background to the background that I came into the hobby with, which was Don Featherstone and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of the people who've come in the last 15, maybe 20 years who've come from a Warhammer background find themselves very, very comfortable with games that are derivatives from that Games Workshop type mentality and mechanisms. And if you present them with something that is different, you will often find that some people go, oh, I'm out of my comfort zone, and therefore that's more complicated than what I'm used to. It isn't actually more complicated than what they're used to. What it is it's different to what they're used to. And I do think that that's something that some people have got closed minds to systems that are not from the background that they come through their hobby with.
And it will probably also account for one reason why a couple of rule sets in particular are more popular than others.
Absolutely right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, because people who like my product will go, oh gosh, I recognise some aspects of Chain of Command from Sharp Practice, and therefore if they played Sharp Practice and enjoyed it, they will often pick this up more readily. Not that the two actually are that closely related now, because we've gone through several generations, and certainly the command and control mechanism is just totally different. There's no such thing as blinds. There's no such thing as... Actually, that reminds me, talking of conversations that Mike mentioned on TMP about them being complex, there was a guy there talking about it the other day saying, I won't like Chain of Command because I don't like blinds and I don't like card-driven systems. And you think, well, it ain't got blinds and it ain't a card-driven system, but,
apart from that,
that is just demonstrative of the mentality that some people will go, I'm outside my comfort zone, therefore my immediate reaction is I won't like this, therefore I won't look any further. So I don't think they're any more complex. Yes, I mean there are complexities, there are subtleties to the rules. For example, you can take an infantry section down, send out some scouts. You can post a couple of men doing one thing, another few guys doing another thing. So that does become more subtle as you go into doing different things with the unit, because I don't want to create a situation where you have an artificiality whereby you as the section leader or a section leader couldn't say, right, you two guys get up in that window and take the Bren with you, because I think you've got to be able to have that flexibility on the tabletop. I don't want to create a set of rules where you say the basic element in this, the smallest element in this is the rifle section, because I don't believe when you've got a platoon of 30-odd men that you need to create artificial boundaries. You should allow a corporal to say, 2 guys go and do that, or 3 guys go and do that, or 4 guys go and do that, because it's a skirmish game ultimately. So maybe some people perceive that as being a bit more complicated if they are used to games which say, well, you've got to have, everything's got to operate in full units. But I don't perceive that as being more complex. I just think it's more subtle.
Yes, indeed. As you say, you've got a degree of flexibility which some systems don't allow you. It is always going to be the case of unfamiliarity can breed confusion and potentially doubt. Am I playing this right?
I think that's very interesting, because the thing that I find most on the Yahoo group or on the Too Fat Lardies forum, when people go, we had this situation and we did this, and we had situation B and we did this, and we had situation C when we did this. And 9 times out of 10 I go, yeah, that's exactly right. But it's only self-doubt that stops them getting on with it. And I wonder whether that is a product of the way that people now have contact with rules authors, whereas 20 years ago, 15 years ago, they didn't, because 15 years ago, they couldn't have gone, I'm going to send an email to whoever the rules author was in those days. So they just got on with it and made their most sensible decision and were happy with that. Whereas now people know that they can play a game tonight and drop me an email tomorrow morning and get the definitive answer. Well, is my answer any more definitive than theirs? Possibly so. But on the other hand, is it better than theirs? Probably not. Common sense is probably the best ally in that situation.
I suppose because of some of the culture that some people play in, where rules interpretation is king, and therefore people have moved away from, what's common sense and what does common sense say should happen in this situation. And so many people are used to saying, what's it saying in the rules?
You see a lot of cases where people treat the printed rules as gospel. And there's quite a few things there with it. You find people, if they don't like or don't agree with a set of rules, they won't change them, they'll throw the rules away. And then the question I see, which drives me round the twist, because the answer is always yes, or yes if you apply a little bit of common sense, is, can I use this set of rules with these figures at this scale? It's like, can I play Chain of Command at 20 mil, 12 mil, 54 mil? And the answer is just be brave. Take a little bit of courage and look at the rules and think what you could possibly do. The rules are, yes, if you've got something like 40k or Flames of War or Bolt Action where there is a tournament scene and it's required that everyone plays to the same rules, otherwise you get chaos and there is nothing you can do. You just cannot have that. With something like most of Rich's rules, quite a lot of the other rules that you're just playing down the club, make a ruling, make a decision, stick with it.
And that's something we seem to have moved away from in more recent years. And again, maybe this is something that Rich has already alluded to with the change in people's gaming background.
I certainly think that's the case. I think long in the tooth, I suppose, but what we used to find 25 years ago at the local club is you'd get youngsters coming from the local Games Workshop shop who would get a bit older and then think, I don't really want to hang around with a load of 12-year-olds anymore. So they would seek out the local historical wargaming club. And we would go, here you go, look, this is what we've got to offer. And you used to find that they'd go, ooh, that's different. But they would then rapidly get over the fact that, yes, it is different, but it doesn't mean that different is bad, because they would see that instead of having, all the fluff that is produced commercially for them to buy, the background to this galactic empire or whatever, the fluff was the historical accounts of what had happened. So they've got an unlimited amount of fluff. So it opens their eyes to not just an officially created world, which restricts actually how much they can find out about it. They've now got in historical wargaming an unrestricted world, and an infinite supply of information on all different historical periods. And they would make that transition fairly rapidly and find a period that interested them, be it Napoleonics or World War II or whatever, and then they would develop on from there. What seems to be more the case now is that you're not getting people making that transition. They seem to be sticking more with the same type of games, expecting to have universes pre-prepared for them. Even in a World War II setting, they need the handbooks. They need to have the comfort of having all that data provided for them, and data which is definite and finite.
There's about 3 points I'd make there. One of them being that that's not what I'm seeing down our club. And I don't know how much of that is due to the fact...
That's very positive.
I don't know how much of that is due to the fact that the local Games Workshop store is emulating in microcosm what Games Workshop is doing in macrocosm and shooting itself in the foot. But we've had a huge influx of players who've come and fundamentally played 40k and sometimes fantasy and very little else. And I was certainly... about September last year, you can guarantee that you've seen our clubhouse, all of our upstairs pretty much was playing something Games Workshop derived. I went up there this week, and for some reason I hadn't got a game, and of the crowd who were usually up there, there was a game of 40k, there was a game of fantasy, there were 2 people playing Flames of War Nam, which is, okay, so it's not Charlie Don't Surf, but it's a step in a historical direction. There were an awful lot of people playing things who were very much one-track players when they joined the club. That's certainly, from our point of view, that's a good thing. The other thing I noticed, and I don't know whether this is something that you find, but I've found that since I started playing Lardies rules in particular, but it has extended to not just Lardies rules. I find myself playing a lot more with an umpire, which takes away some of those rules issues. Sometimes it's me being the umpire, but sometimes you'll find that people are introducing new games or older games, and they will quite happily umpire, and people seem to be quite enjoying that as a role.
Yeah, and I've always enjoyed umpiring games because I think you get to see both sides of the coin, and I think you also, and you almost become, we can go into, you almost become a games master, don't you, in the Dungeons and Dragons sense. It's your role and responsibility to keep the game moving in the right direction and keep it interesting. And of course,
it gives you the advantage that you can hide things from the players.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely right. No, I agree. But picking up on the point you said, I would suggest that, whilst, you're talking about these young people coming through into the club, the type of rules that they tend to go for tend to be more of the, what's the word I'm looking for, type that are...
prescriptive, for want of a better word.
Prescriptive isn't prescriptive, but it's not the ideal word I'm looking for. Whilst they've converted to historical, they tend to be playing things which are GW derivative. That's the word I'm looking for. More derivative in the way rules are written. So they've gone from playing with Space Marines to playing with a very, very similar type of rule mechanism, but they've got War of the Roses figures. But the War of the Roses figures still do things
tanks.
Pretty much the same way that the Space Marines did. Or tanks, tanks instead of walkers.
Witness the conversation we had on the previous podcast on the subject of people selling complete Flames of War armies to play Battlegroup Overlord.
Indeed.
Because I still just do not understand that one.
Right, okay. No, I can't get that one. Yeah. But that is very much the mindset that if you're buying into a set of rules, you're also buying into the whole product family.
It's really interesting what you were saying about umpiring, because that is something that, again, it evolved out of a different type of game. When you start looking at the Featherstone era set of rules and what grew out of that, what I think most of us ended up starting gaming at least in some point, it always assumed that there were at least 3 people involved, one of which who was umpiring everybody else. And that is something that has been moved away from an awful lot in recent years. And actually, do you think in some ways that might in itself put people off? And somebody suddenly turns around and goes, well, hang on a second, in order to play this game, it appears that you need an umpire. I know it was something when I first started gaming, I was kind of thinking, oh, hang on a second, rather than just turning up and playing with my mate, I need to get somebody else involved here. But as you say,
I don't think it's true.
It's a two-edged sword, isn't it? Because at the same time, it means that two people can turn up. If you've got one person who knows the rules, is the arbiter of decisions, then at least it means that it's fair on all sides, isn't it?
Well, I'm not convinced that games do need umpires. I mean, what I normally find when I play games here is I will be umpiring it because I tend to have written the rules, but I'll be playing one side and whoever has come down for a game will be playing the other side. And if somebody comes here to show me a set of rules that they're interested in talking to me about, they will run the game whilst playing one side and I will play the other side. I think the only set of rules that I publish that I would definitely say you an umpire for is Kriegspiel, because it's based around fulfilling a certain function. Other rule sets, I never use an umpire. I mean, we do use an umpire at the club sometimes, but that tends to be because I think that most games, any set of rules, are enhanced by having an umpire there. Do you need one? No, of course not. No. It's certainly not my normal way of gaming to
the other thing it is though is when you're bringing up a new set of rules, it's a great teaching mechanism.
Oh yeah.
It's a fantastic teaching mechanism.
I certainly used it with Chain of Command. I went around an awful lot of clubs all over the country showing people the rules, and what I've tried to do is extend that, as we've talked about before, with the YouTube videos, because there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth Although I have been described as other more unpleasant parts of a horse, but there we are. But there's nothing like people hearing it rather than reading it. I mean, I tend to learn more, learn things more by osmosis, just by being there and watching a game playing and listening to people talking about the rules, and I'll go, oh yeah, I understand that now, which I never do when I pick up a rule set. I mean,
it's a fundamental truth of education that once you get to a certain age, you learn by doing, not by reading, or by being lectured.
Yeah. So, do we have to have two Fat Lardies rules have to have an umpire? Absolutely not. No more so than Flames of War or any of the other, immensely popular and very good rule sets out there.
I was more noting on the fact that it seems that they lend themselves to the process more. It's a role which is fun for the umpire, whereas I suspect it would be less so in some other systems.
It depends. I think it would be umpiring any game would be deeply unpleasant for the umpire if you turned up, threw some random terrain on the table, and then two players arrived with 1,500-point armies, or however many points, doesn't matter. What is interesting for an umpire is if he goes and says, right, I want to devise a really interesting scenario here, maybe where side A has only got 750 points, but I'm going to put the terrain like this, and we're going to have a wood there, and I'm going to have a bridge here. The other side has 1,500 points, and what the defender doesn't know is that at a certain point in the evening, these other 200 points worth of reconnaissance troops are going to appear on the flank, and they've got to try and go over that bridge before the other people shut it off, blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying. If you've got an umpire and he spends half an hour thinking about a scenario and scribbling down some notes, you're likely to get a more dynamic and exciting and interesting game with more narrative to it than if you just turn up and chuck figures on the table and go, right, I'm lining up here, you line up there. But that doesn't refer to any one particular set. I mean, you could do that just as well with any rule set. I mentioned Flames of War. It would be perfect for doing scenarios with.
Which brings us rather neatly back to at the sharp end, because what you're talking about there is basically providing context, and at the sharp end does that brilliantly.
I think every game is enhanced by having a backstory to it, and actually one of the easiest way to do this is to use a campaign, a simple campaign, as you've seen with Dux Britanniarum, as we're now seeing with At the Shen. It's a campaign that doesn't need a lot of preparation. It's a campaign that barely needs 5 minutes managing at the end of the game. And so, but what it does then do is it provides context for every single game within that campaign. It's a lot easier to set up a campaign than just write a different scenario for every single game you play, because the campaign is doing all that hard work for you. But I do think that there's an awful lot to be said for context, as you rightly say. I'm a massive fan of games with context. It's easy to get immersed in than just I have 1,500 points, you have 1,500 points, scattered three trees and a hill on the table. When you know why you're there and what the consequences of success and failure are, it suddenly becomes much, much easier to get a level of immersion that you can't get out of the standard tournament encounter.
And the fundamental thing here, again, it's something that people seem to, or there is a conception that even if on a standard club night, it is easier to turn up with 1,500 points aside, or whatever your game system allows for, and fight an encounter battle. And that is easier creating a scenario, or fighting some sort of scenario, simply because we know that I've got this army, you've got that army, we can just turn up and lay it all out on the table. And there is this conception that as soon as you start getting complicated things like scenarios involved, it becomes an awful lot easier, an awful lot harder, and you lose half your gaming evening to sorting out the scenario and sorting out, what your forces are and all this sort of, this, that, and the other. I just think that is a conception that people have.
Perhaps this comes back to what we were talking about earlier with regards rules that you haven't come across those mechanisms before, and it's easier to stick with what I know. Well, it's easier for me to get a can of beer out of my fridge and go and sit in a puddle in the garden and have a drink. But I would enjoy it more if I bothered to walk half a mile to my local pub. I'd have a much more pleasant evening. It's necessarily taking the easy route doesn't necessarily do you any favours. If you invest a bit of energy into something, you're likely to get far more in return than if you don't bother investing at all. You're going to get a very, very samey experience. If me and my mate have both got 1,500 armies, and I honestly I'm not inferring any game system with this at all. I mean, it could be any system that uses points. But if me and my mate turn up every week with our same 1,500 point armies, it's going to be a very, very similar game, I'd have thought. Whereas if we go, actually, this week, why don't we do this? Why don't we have, I'm defending this position and I don't have as many men as you. Now, there you go. I made that scenario up just now while we've been talking. It's not the best scenario in the world, but it didn't take a lot of effort, and at least it's different to both of us having 1,500 points. QED, maybe?
Pretty much. I think, though, that one of the things that, moving back to slightly less abstract meta-concepts of wargaming, I think there's this degree to which that things like Dux and Chain of Command, particularly at the sharp end, have done that I think is possibly one of the reasons why they're actually shifting so many units, is that you seem to have figured out a way of winning the context versus immediacy battle. Because the issue with providing context is doing so in a timely manner. Because so you've pulled a scenario out of your hat in 30 seconds there, but the deeper the context. If you can win the battle of providing deep context without having to kill yourself for 3 days to research the battle, which is what or map moves and crap like that. Whereas the Dux campaign system and at Sharp End seem to have just nailed the way of producing that immediacy while still giving you bucket loads of context. And I think I really, really like that.
Well, essentially what I've done there is use the same mechanism as I do when I'm writing rules, and that's about saying, okay, what's the effect, not what's the cause? What are the key areas here? And distilling it down to find out what is really important and what actually might be there, but you can take out because it doesn't really have very much effect. So you just have to distill that. I'm going to say just. It's not as easy as just. But what I've tried to do is say, what are the key issues in this that are going to be important that we really should be considering? And I do think when you're talking about a platoon officer in the field in the Second World War, what are his concerns? Well, it's going to be what the colonel thinks of him. It's going to be what his boss thinks of him and how much support he's going to give him when he's faced with the next task. It's going to be keeping his men happy, or as happy as he possibly can, and that in itself is a balancing act because he's got to get the job done. He's got to win the battles, but at the same time, if he does that by sacrificing too many of his men, then they're going to accept a level of losses. But if the losses are too high, they're going to be feeling a bit negative about him. And then if the men feel too negative, somebody's going to talk to the company sergeant major, who's going to talk to the regimental sergeant major, and he's going to talk to the colonel, and then you've got an issue where you might be keeping the colonel happy, but then the colonel finds out that your men aren't happy, and then the colonel's not happy. So you've got to look at the key areas that are important, the third one being what the guy thinks of himself, the platoon leader. Everything else, are the men getting baths regularly, and have they had a change of underwear this month? Are all things that you think in a campaign setting, do I include? And I seriously did consider including random events which said your men have, the mobile bath unit turns up and they have a bath and they get a change of underwear and their morale increases. And then I thought, well, it's just adding something that you don't need to add. you can do if you want to. Once you purchased it, you can add what you like, but you have to distill it down and find out what's actually important, and then focus, as I've done, on those 3 key areas. And everything else is really additional fluff that we can skip by, giving it a cursory nod on the way.
But the neat thing that happens when you do that, though, is that because you've given context and you've given it fairly easily, I've certainly found that the players tend to latch onto that, and they actually get the immersion, and they will actually backfill stuff that you don't care about in the rules. Absolutely. I mean, witness Andy and my write-ups of the Dux Britanniarum campaigns. Some of your chain of command write-ups are clearly going much deeper than anything that's presented in 3 numbers on a state of the platoon table.
Yeah, you get to know the people, and it's
exactly.
Insane to say that, but you do get to know the people, and you do actually start to care about them. And I think that adds an additional frisson is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. It adds something extra. It adds another dimension to your gaming. I mean, I really thought hard about the platoon lead self-regard, because there are some potentially uncomfortable outcomes there. If this guy starts going into bad times and gets into a spiral of despondency. But at the same time, I thought it would be wrong to gloss over that, because our rules have always focused and will always focus on men in conflict. We really do want to see, like that guy, that US officer from Afghanistan who said, I have seen big men, the concept of big men work in action, and you've got it nailed. And we've always looked at that, and that's something that I haven't shied away from with this, because it is about trying to keep your platoon commander in the right frame of mind to do his job. It would be insulting to the men who made the sacrifices they did in real life to not actually address that issue in reality, in the reality of the background of the game context.
I mean, equally, I think you and I have discussed in the past Ken Maxey's book, Battle.
Yeah.
You can take that book, which is drawn from his first-hand experiences. Yeah. It's fictionalized, but it's clearly, he knows what he's talking about. You can take that book and you can take a copy of the I Ain't Been Shopman rules, and you can see big men in action all the way through that book.
Well, you can look at any of the books we were talking about earlier, Battleground Europe. You can go on any of those tours, and they're absolutely packed, because the way they illustrate the actions on those important days in history is they go, here's the road, and this is what Fred Bloggs stood up and did. And nearly every single place that you go to, it's all about somebody like Stan Hollis going, right, I'm not having this. I'm gonna deal with it, and I'm gonna make it happen. And Audie Murphy, and these guys,
the guys on Omaha,
possibly
things
some
like
of the
that.
Celebrated. Yeah, they're possibly some of the most celebrated people, but it's not unique. It happens at every level in command, and so many of these stories we never hear about, because sadly the people who did it and the people who saw it never lived through it. But that's leadership in action is absolutely critical, and that's how wars are won and lost. It's not about caliber of rifles. It's not about I can definitely move 6 inches. It's about men. So I think it's important that we reflect that.
I think at this point it would be good to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about some more upcoming releases from Two Fat Lardies.
I must get through to Sergeant Watson's position. Jenkins, cover me.
Sir. Whoa.
Sergeant Watson, bring your men in. Withdraw.
It's all right, sir. We're enjoying ourselves.
What?
Yes, sir. It's these here chain of command rules, sir. We're having great fun.
Chain of command?
That's right, sir. It's a challenging but fun blend of command and control. It gives me the freedom I want to fight the way I want to. Never had so much fun, sir. And we've cooked you some sausages. Can't be helped, sir. Me and the lads are staying put.
Chain of Command World War II platoon level rules from two fat Lardies. They really put you in control. And they're even better than sausages.
So, although we've just been talking an awful lot about World War II, one subject that appears to keep cropping up again and again and again is Dux Britanniarum, obviously the Age of Arthur rules that you released. And this year we're looking at an expansion, or supplement, or however you want to call it, for those rules, aren't we?
Yeah, I think expansion's probably the best word. What Dux Britanniarum obviously focuses on is a post-Roman Britannia. And by definition, that means we're going to be looking at what had previously been the Romanised parts of Britain. So really England and Wales as we see them now. And the focus was very much on the incoming of the Germanic tribes, the Saxons, the Angles, the Jutes, and the sub-Roman Britons, the Romano-British, trying to fight them off and retain their lands and take care of their own defences. What we didn't look at were the other three tribes on these islands, specifically the Irish, the Scotti, and the Picts. And what we wanted to do was bring them in, because throughout the period that we're talking about, it wasn't just the Germanic tribes and the Romano-British fighting each other. You had lots of other people getting involved, specifically raiding. So we've called this expansion, Dux Britanniarum, the Raiders. And we have actually just picked up all the artwork today from the artist, and we are going to be publishing on around the end of the first week in April, beginning of the second week in April. So we're right on target with that for Easter.
Fantastic.
Yep, it's nice to be able to achieve things by Easter. Everybody likes to see us do that.
Nobody will believe you.
No.
In fact, that could be a special. Yes, Lardy exclusive, first time ever published at Easter. Yes,
that's not true. Actually, that isn't true. We normally produce everything on time. I've never, in the 10 years we've produced 20 Christmas and summer specials, we've never been late with any of them. But we have been slightly late with other things. But yeah, no, we're very much on track with that. I mean, obviously, the Raiders supplement is about a year late, but as we discussed previously, there were issues with the artwork. That's now all completely done, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I mean, I know that I sent some low-res images over to you guys earlier, and I think you'll agree that the map of Ireland and the map of what's now Scotland are really stunningly done. I mean, they
are serious drool on the keyboard material. Those are.
They really are, aren't they? I mean, the Coral, who did the artwork, had worked previously for English Heritage, and I was very keen that we produce something that was not only part of a game, but was something that actually would stand up to critical acclaim, is probably too strong a word, but it would really look the part and be something that people could refer to if they were just interested in that area in the Dark Ages. So we put a lot of research into this, and of course that isn't easy, and you have to speculate on an awful lot of this. I mean, for example, we know very little about the Picts indeed, and if you read Dark Age ancient Irish legends, they are just mental. They are absolutely lunatic. They're so much fun, but there's no way you can treat it as serious history. But there's some great characters in there, and they are really, really inspiring. So you pays your money, you takes your choice, and you consult a lot of archaeological records, but you also consult the poems and the sagas of the time, and then create the world and the backdrop, as we talked about before, for what you want to do with the game. And what I think is going to be so nice about this is that these people that we're inching into it are going to be very, very different in the way they fight. They're going to be very, very different in the way they operate. And I think it's going to add a huge new dimension to the whole Dux system.
Is it providing things which can be backfitted into the classic, if you like, Dux campaign?
Oh, absolutely right. In fact, you're going to be, let's say you are an Irish king. One of your objectives is going to be raiding the west coast of Britain, and you're going to be coming up against, your Dux Britanniarum armies, be they Saxons or be they Romano-British. If you're a Pict, you're going to want to be raiding over the wall or getting in your boat and sailing round it, and the same if you're a Scotai. But there's all sorts of other subtleties and nuances. If you are a Pictish king, well, there's lots of other Pictish kings, and you want to make sure that while you're going off in your boat to raid Saxon-held land, that your next door neighbour doesn't come in and biff your wife over the head and run off with the family silver. If you are going to be an Irish petty king, you are equally going to have to establish some kind of credentials through heroic acts and achievements before you're going to get enough people to follow you, getting in funny little boats and sailing over that channel to land on the coast of Romano-British held Cumbria or Wales or Devon and Cornwall. So they have different career paths, if you know what I'm saying. And they have different sorts of objectives. They are not looking to conquer provinces as the Saxons are. They're not looking to hold land as the Romano-British are. They're looking to come and nick things and establish their reputation. If you're an Irish king, the more hostages you get. So look in history, people like Niall of the 9 hostages. Well, why did Niall have 9 hostages? It's because he had 9 sub-kings who were beholden to him and gave him tribute, and in order to keep him in line, he nicked their grannies, or whoever the hostages happened to be. So you've got very, very different ways of showing your greatness. And if you are an Irish king, you want to become the High King of all Ireland. If you're the Pictish sub-king, you want to become the king, the most prominent king in southern Pictavia or northern Pictavia. And then once you're there, you want to become the High King of the Picts. And if you are Scottish, Scotai, you've got a totally different emphasis because you are kind of divided between what's now Ulster and the Western Isles. So they all operate in very, very different ways and have got different objectives, but they most certainly can and will come into contact with the Romano-British and the Saxons. And the other fourth force who are in there are going to be the Northern British, who get different options from those which they have in Dux Britanniarum. So you're going to get forces evolving to become more like the Godolphin or the Strathclyde British, where they're going to be having more mounted men in order to fight the fast-moving raiders. So you've kind of really got 4 different new factions who are coming into play. And they can all be used at exactly the same time, which is brilliant, because the Romans were talking about the Irish raiding the west coast of Wales as early as 300 AD. In fact, Cardigan Bay, part of that area there, was actually a kind of Irish settled area anyway. So there's a huge amount of toing and froing between all parts of these isles during that time, and now we can all chuck them into the mix, which will be great fun.
So basically we're in a situation where it almost sounds like this supplement you can use as almost within a standalone campaign if you wanted to fight something within the Irish or the Pict community. It hasn't got to be something that you have to integrate into the greater scheme of things, but you have the opportunity to do so, yeah?
Yes, absolutely right, up to a point, because once you become High King of Ireland and you're living in your High King of Ireland's palace, you're kind of going to get a bit bored, really, because all your other sub-kings are going to be sending you their hostages and paying you a bit of cash. But then the next logical thing to do is to get in a boat and go and raid other people and try and bash them over the head. But yeah, I mean, just becoming High King of Ireland or becoming a prominent king in Ireland, which is what you need to do before you can start raiding Britannia. that's a campaign in its own right, which is quite fun. So yes, you would certainly have plenty of gaming fun, just sticking to trying to become the most prominent or a significant Irish king, or a significant Pictish king. Go on.
Or I guess you can do fun things like send one of your sub-kings off to conquer bits of Britain for you, or if you want to do something in a sort of larger, more role-play scale with multiple players.
The problem with that, then, is that he might get a bit more glory than you do. And then that could negatively affect your status as a senior king in Ireland if other people are going off coming back with all this cash. So that's probably something you want to stop them doing. So there's more subtleties to it. There's many layers at which you have to be careful. But you can definitely just focus your campaigns where you are in Ireland or in what's northern Scotland. But I think it really comes into its own when you combine the whole thing together. And remember, you need Dux Britanniarum because that's got the rules in it. So you're going to have it anyway. So you might as well use it.
So does this actually provide stuff that you can use just within a sort of a Britons and Saxons campaign? I mean, there's things like the mysterious armourer that you can recruit as a British king, but nobody seems to know what to do with.
No, quite. Well, all these things are going to be introduced, yes, because those provinces, those little symbols on the map, become particularly attractive to people who are coming in boats and raiding. So, you're getting a lot more. We obviously planned ahead for this, so you've got more things that are happening there that are going to be important. Now, if you are coming from a society where you haven't necessarily got the best of armourers, if somebody has got this fantastic capability, you're going to want to sniff that out and see what's going on. So yeah, there are all sorts of extra dynamics in the come in based on what's already on the original Dux Britanniarum maps.
All right, so I've just dug up the Dux Brit map, and you're talking about things like the bits where it says iron or pottery or...
Yes, that's right.
That's right. I wonder what those are for.
Yes, quite. And if you look on the Irish map, you will note that they don't have iron and pottery and things like that, because this might be slightly unfair, but the presumption is that what you've got in sub-Roman Britannia is the remains of Roman industry. Yes, anybody can knock up an old pot. You're going to be able to do that whether you're in sub-Roman Britain or, Picty land or Ireland. But the point is that within Britannia, there are the remains of the old industries which are semi-functioning and enough to make them lucrative centres that you're going to want to raid. On the Irish map, you've got something slightly different there, which is the influence of the Irish Church, where you're seeing are effectively, whilst they don't have any Roman industry, the churches are particularly good at collecting wealth. So you'll see the Celtic crosses on the Irish map, which make those particular areas particularly attractive ones for other Irish kings to raid. So you are looking at those things that you've got there, but also introducing new different concepts from the different maps. The Picts are particularly interested in metalworking skills because they value attractive brooches and ornaments very, very highly. So if you've got metalworking skills, then that will do you some favours, but it also might make them very interested in coming down and knocking on your door.
You're making me look at the Dux Brit maps in a whole new light now.
Yeah, quite. Well, it's all part of my cunning plan.
World domination?
Well, possibly, but I mean, when you look at the sharp end, you will note that the 6 scenarios in the back of Chain of Command rules were already planned as being the ones for the campaign handbook when it came out. So we do try and plan ahead and think about the future development of the game further rather than just making it up on the hoof. And this is, one of those situations where I just felt that it was, when we produced the original map, it was, do we put these things on there and the original rules, do we include them in there even though they're not kicking in yet? And the answer is, of course, yes. Otherwise, people won't have we'll have to start buying additional maps, and we don't want that. So those things are now all of a sudden going to come into their own. Whereas previously people thought, oh, that's interesting, there used to be potteries there. Well, yes, but now they actually mean something more in a game context.
You were. I'm having trouble remembering whether this was in a back channel chat or whether we actually mentioned it earlier on in the podcast. You were saying things about figure ranges for the new races, tribes, call them what you will.
I was. We obviously stock the starter armies for the Romano-British and for the Saxons, which are very kindly produced for us by Gripping Beast. And I've just been talking to them today, actually, as well, about the starter armies for the Irish and the Scotai and the Picts, all of which we're going to be stocking. And now, I say all of which because we're only going to be stocking 2 of them, because the Irish and the Scotai both start off the same. This is because the Irish and Scotai both had very, very strong connections, because the Scotai at this point in time, right on the western fringes of what's now Scotland, and their super highway, if you like, on which they did all their business, was the sea. So their cultural connections are very much with the people in Ulster, in Ireland, because they can just jump in a coracle and nip over there in no time at all. Whereas to get into the lands of the Picts, they've got to climb over great big mountains, and that will take them weeks, and they'll have to get pack animals and so on and so forth. So culturally, the Scotai and the Irish start off in the same place. What happens is that as you progress through the campaign, you get to different thresholds where certain skills and developments come in, and you get reinforcements, but you also now are going to get potentially different tactical options. So you're going to see that whilst the Scotai and the Irish start in the same place, they're going to diverge and become clearly 2 different people, which is replicating what happened historically. I mean, obviously, historically it happened over hundreds of years. We're going to see it happen rather more quickly over the course of maybe, a longish campaign. You're going to see a lot of development there. So, but we are going to be stocking those armies, and the focus is going to be very, very different. You're going to see some totally new troop types coming in. I mean, the raiders themselves are a different type of troop type to the warriors that we've seen before. They're very hard-hitting, but they're quite brittle. You're going to be seeing different sorts of cavalry. You're going to be seeing different sorts of skirmishers. You're going to be seeing chariots. You're potentially even going to be seeing some war dogs, which people keep asking me about. As soon as I say, oh, we're going to do picks, they go, I got dogs. There's going to be lots of different troop types and stuff, but very much operating from the basis of the existing rules. So it should be anybody who's upgrading, if you like, from Dux Britanniarum into using these different armies should see the rules are, you will pick the rules up within 20 minutes. Any rule changes there are, and then it's going to all systems go. We've had a lot of people play testing these. The South East Scotland War Games Club, quite appropriately, have been assisting us with a lot of play testing, and they took them over to Crisis in Antwerp back in November and put on some of their some games there. And there's a huge following for Dux Britanniarum over in Belgium, and they said that people absolutely loved it and picked it up, immediately. So there's not going to be any real learning curve to go through, and it's all positive if you know what I'm saying.
Sounds great. Are you going to be adding any new raid scenarios?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You look at warfare in Ireland in this period, and the scenario options are raiding to steal cattle, raiding to steal cattle, raiding to steal cattle, and raiding to steal cattle. That's kind of what happened.
With an occasional side order of raiding to steal your cattle back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. But and also with the subplot of going, do something daftly heroic in order for people to go, blimey, he's incredible. And then all of a sudden you become this fantastic Celtic hero. So we've had to be quite ingenious with creating some scenarios which are true to the sort of Irish Celtic legends, but also provide a bit of variety. because there is a limit to, I'm stealing the cattle back from somebody who stole them from me, but I'd nicked them in the first place, is the third cattle stealing option. It starts to get a bit spurious.
It starts to become a sort of everlasting chain of, I can't remember whose cows those were in the first place.
Yes, that's right. Well, I think ultimately that does sum up Dark Age Ireland. The cows were very much a collective thing. It was just who was looking after them at that moment in time that was that seemed to be very important. But I do very definitely get the impression that they weren't necessarily raiding for cattle because they wanted the cattle. They were raiding for cattle because they wanted to create this legend of what fantastic deeds they'd created. And so the cattle was just an excuse. The whole thing was just about being heroic and incredibly flamboyantly Celtic. And that's hugely appealing, really, in a campaign which is based on personalities.
One of the things that Andy and I, who's my regular Dux Brit opponent, really like about the raid scenarios is the fact that you can roll the same one up twice and it plays completely differently the second time, and the third, and the fourth. I guess you're aiming to keep this with the Dux Raiders ones as well.
Absolutely. That's got to be key. That's got to be key because that you're going to see. I mean, to be honest with you, there's a limit to how many generic scenarios you can create for this type of scenario. One of the things that are going to be different is that the terrain is going to be, the way you generate terrain is going to be different, with some inspiration from a piece that you actually wrote in one of our specials. Because,
guilty as charged.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's going to be terrain that reflects the type of terrain that they talk about in their legends. Because that's what was there. So you're going to be seeing a landscape which is potentially a bit more wild.
I was about to say, because looking at some of the maps, some bits of Scotland look like it's just get every tree you've got on every hill you've got.
Yeah, quite. Well, intriguingly, I mean, Scotland is very hilly. We know that now, but there were the deforestation process has been relatively slow over a period of history and time. I was listening to a thing the other day talking about how primitive man should be at one with nature and so on and so forth. No, they weren't. When they're out hunter-gathering, they didn't shake the tree to get the nuts off it. They cut the tree down, and they lived in an area long enough to cut all the trees down, and then they went to live somewhere else. So rather than invent the ladder, they just killed all the trees. So it's interesting. There's more trees there in Scotland than there are now. But yeah, definitely. I mean, Scotland. The terrain in Scotland is really quite impressive when you see it presented in that.
You will still tend to see clear areas around settlements.
Yes, you will. Of course, you will. Yeah, exactly. So you've got to take into account the fact you are not creating a table which is a microcosm of the whole of Scotland. It's it's an area where people live. Therefore, it's not 5,000 foot up a mountain.
I've quite often found while designing or laying out scenery for tables for ducks, you wind up with clear areas in the middle and a sort of a microcosm of the broader terrain around the edges. Seems to be quite a prevalent way to lay out the scenery just for your own benefit as well. So, given that the Dux rules do give you control over that.
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, they do. They don't just give you control over it. If we're playing each other, they give you and me control over it. So you put some stuff out, I put some stuff out, and then we both have a shuffle, to see what we want moved. So, and I thought about that long and hard when I was writing it, and it was a case of people are going to attempt to place terrain to best suit them because it's human nature. So you can either start legislating against it, or you can just embrace it and say, well, there you go, let's create a system which is as fair as it can possibly be. And obviously, if you are Romano-British, you want a bit of open room to create your shield wall, but you also want a bit of terrain to anchor it on at the flanks. If you're a Saxon, you probably want to have a bit more broken terrain where the British can't form up in their, Romanesque formations. So I'm quite pleased with the terrain system that we've got in Dux because, A, as you rightly say, you do get a different game every time, unless you're particularly making an effort to fail at that. And B, you do have a system that's not entirely unfair and does come out with something that's pretty much equitable, and I think that's important.
But even if you do try and force the terrain to be what you do, there's sufficient many random dice rolls involved in the setup of all the raid scenarios that just because you have a hill there and two woods there, the next time you're in the scenario, you might be coming on the entirely opposite side of the table.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, some people have said, "Oh, you know, potentially you get a game where one side can't win." Well, yeah, you do, but the whole point is it's a campaign, and if somebody gets one of those very, very occasional easy victories, well, that's just the way life is, isn't it? And you think it's very unlikely that will happen in the next game. So the whole thing has to be viewed in the round, I think. And whilst people say it is theoretically possible to create a scenario where one side can't win, I've never personally actually seen that, because you can always try and get some kind of win out of it by doing some damage which will carry over into the next game. Now, that might not rate as a victory, it might be a Pyrrhic victory, but it is some kind of little win in a scenario where your opponent is always going to get the big win, and that's what's good about a campaign. It creates a situation in which you're not just lined up facing an enemy and everything's predictable. It's, my God, this is a bit rough. How do I try and get the best out of this situation? And that's the type of scenario where heroic actions that people sing sagas about can happen.
Yep. And equally, I've seen several tables that Andy's looked at and gone, "You're going to absolutely wipe the floor with me here," and then proceeded to hand me my backside on the plate.
Yeah.
You know, we've had ones where the Saxons are, a third of the board from their objective, and the Britons are coming from the opposite corner, and somebody still manages to beat me.
Yeah. Well, finding the loot that you're looking for isn't always easy, is it? Although the raiders are pretty good at nicking things, so they do tend to find loot a bit quicker than the other nationalities.
Right, that's it. Time to build a picked army.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and again, that's one of the things that you say. Time to build picked army. Picks are interesting. But the Irish are interesting. Whilst they share a lot of similar troop types, there's lots of very, very different balance and some interesting choices to be made. Do I put my sub-king in a chariot? If so, he's tremendously mobile and he can zoom off with the cavalry and do things that raiders love to do. But at the same time, if I do that, he can't command and rally the main body of my foot raiders.
The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is very happy to be sponsored by Coat d'Arms Paints. Now, Coat d'Arms have been supporting miniatures painters with their products for well over 20 years in some way, shape or form. Their current range is 150 sets of acrylic paint, which are available both as individual colours, but also in paint sets depending on period. Things such as the Ancients paint set, the World War II German, World War II American, World War II Russian paint sets, and they also include things like an ACW set and even a Horsetown set. That's one way to purchase your paints. And they also do triads. Now, if you're a fan of the three-colour system made famous by the likes of people like Kevin Dallimore, you may like to purchase your paints with a dark shade, a medium shade and a highlight. And the triad system from Coat d'Arms allows you to do this. They also have ranges of textured paints called Brushscape, which allow you to paint from textures onto bases as well as colour. And these are ideal especially for smaller scale models. And if you're a fan of the dip method of painting, then Coat d'Arms have their own product available called Super Shader. This is available in light brown, dark brown and black. Coat d'Arms Paints have a whole range of products available to try. Check them out at www.blackhat.co.uk and be sure to tell them that we sent you.
So, Richard, one thing we did talk about when you were on the show a while ago was the Lard Ambassador program, and at the time it was almost still in a kind of a concept phase, and you were still talking to a lot of people in the Yahoo group about it and various other bits and pieces. I believe it's moved on massively since then.
Yeah, very much so. We had a call for volunteers. We were looking for people who could go out and fly the flag, almost literally, as it happens, around the world. Because obviously, one of the things that we hear most about is people going, "Hey, look, you're in the UK, we're here wherever, and we never get a chance to see your games." So we've got people all over the world now, and we've kitted them. You're going to see a lot of guys around the wargame shows and conventions now in black polo shirts with a big bright yellow embroidered Lard Ambassador with the Pie in the Pint logo on it. We provided them all with big pull-up banners. We're providing them with point of sale information packs for customers, so handouts for games, little stand-up signage and things like that. And we've got guys all over the world doing that, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, at CanCon in Canberra in Australia last weekend, a couple of weekends ago, we had two groups of Lard running Chain of Command, completely sold out Chain of Command in Australia now, as a result, which is, a fantastic result. And it's great. And the feedback we're getting from these people is they're able to tell us what the gamers on the ground, the guys and gals on the ground are saying to them. They're getting a chance of people saying, "Hey, I bought the rules and it's really fantastic to be able to take part in the game and see how they play." People who said, "I've heard about the rules and, I wanted to have a go," and they're doing a fantastic job. So that is something that hopefully some of your listeners are going to be seeing all over the world, really, which is something we're very, very excited about. And I think the answer is Australia, buy more rule sets. The Australian distributors out there, because we've got lots of guys out there who are really working hard on our behalf, and that's having really positive feedback.
So we mentioned one part of the colonies, or the former colonies. How's it doing in America?
Yeah, very well. Funnily enough, we had our first order through last month from a guy saying, "The reason I'm buying this is I took part in a game put on by one of your Lard ambassadors." It was the first, actual comment in the purchase thing, and that was one of our Lard ambassadors down in Georgia in the United States, a chap called Mark Luther, who was running some games over there, and he handed out a couple of awards, and a couple of people came back and bought rules on the back of that, actually saying this is as a result of that. So yeah, we've got guys covering most of the United States, I hope. So that should be really good. And I'm looking forward to going out to Historicon, not this year, but next year. But hopefully by then, people should be used to seeing the Two Fat Lardies banner on display.
Mm-hmm. So is it something where, is there a regular place where people can go, like, for example, that was one big change that has happened since we last spoke, was the addition of the new Lardies forum onto the website, which is something that we did, that happened towards the end of, no, it wasn't really towards the end of last year. It was the back end of last year, wasn't it? It was it was after the summer.
As you know, we had a situation where we've run the Yahoo group very successfully for the past, I don't know what it is, 12, 14 years. Mm-hmm. And that is a fantastic community. And it's community in every sense of the word. We're not necessarily just talking about Two Fat Lardies products. We're talking about wargaming, but we also talk about, whatever anybody wants to chat about, because it's a community, and that's what communities are like. And people are there to enjoy chatting to other wargamers who share similar interests, not necessarily talking about what those interests are. Yahoo went through some bonkers phase at some point last year where they decided they were going to upgrade, I suppose is the way they viewed it, the whole Yahoo system, Yahoo Mail, Yahoo Groups. It was a period of absolute chaos because, as Yahoo normally do, they know what they want to do, but they haven't really worked out how to do it, so they then just keep making changes and allowing their customers to test it until they get to the point where they go, well, that'll do then, and that's the end product. So we went through a phase where it was really going to hell in a handcart, and it looked like Yahoo Groups was going to spiral off the planet. So we very quickly rigged up the Two Fat Lardies forum. Two Fat Lardies forum, I feel, they're a lot more to be about answering direct questions about the rules, but it is definitely there, and it also includes a section called the Ambassador's Reception, where you can get in there, and that's mainly designed for ambassadors to hear about what's going on, but there's certainly information on there about where ambassadors are going to be putting on games. It's also something we're looking to focus on Lard Island news, and that information out to places like the Miniatures page, where people can then see exactly what's going on. So it's something we're going to be putting up regularly, so hopefully people will get a chance to plan ahead for the shows they want to go to based on where they know Lard ambassadors are going to be showing them the games that are there. But it's definitely, that area is definitely picking up. I mean, I'm looking at Salute this year, and there's about 4 different games going on which are using Chain of Command or IMB Shop Mum or another set of Lardy rules. So we are certainly a lot more high profile now than we've ever been before at the shows, but certainly providing these banners for people which, you know, are there, stood up, saying Two Fat Lardies does allow people to actually see where ambassadors are going to be, and of course then they've got the right kit on saying Lard ambassadors, so you can't spot them really, so that's good. But yeah, so check the forum out. Check out Lard Island News, come on to the Two Fat Lardies Yahoo group and say where are things happening, and all that information is going to be there provided for you.
Fantastic stuff. Well, okay, so we've been talking...
it is fantastic, actually.
It is, yeah.
I really feel that we're making leaps and bounds progress, to be honest with you. I mean, we spent an awful lot of time trying to develop the rules and get into magazines and things like that, because I think for any new publisher in the hobby, any new business in the hobby, it's very difficult to get spotted, very difficult to get seen. And just over the years, we've tried really, really hard to increase our profile. And that's really coming to fruition now, and I think we're actually at the point where we're punching above our weight now, as opposed to the other way around. So that it's great to see, and especially as this is done largely, or the Lard Ambassador program, not by people who are employed by me, but people who really love the rules and want to spread the word of the lard, I suppose. If that isn't blasphemous, I don't know what is.
A young couple. He's only taken the 10 years, but there we go.
14, mate. 14. Bitter years.
Okay, so we've talked about obviously what's coming up. Well, what's just been published and what's coming up in the near future. Looking a bit further afield, what's due out or what's in the pipeline potentially for the rest of this year? I mean, I know as we've discussed on numerous occasions, things tend to get sidelined when other stuff crops up. What is the hope of your main focus for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I move in mysterious ways. My focus this year is actually not on bringing out any new rule sets, but on filling in the gaps with a lot of the stuff we've already produced. I really want to get, and projects that haven't yet made it to fruition. I want to get all the Iron Bean Shopman handbooks finished. I want to get all the army lists for Chain of Command done, which, as you know, the basic army lists are going out there and going to be free for people to download. And the issue with that is it's a lot more time consuming than people think. Basically, we are going back to military manuals for all of the nations and looking at the way their units were structured, but also the way they trained their troops. Because one of the things that Chain of Command is very strong on, and I feel is very important, is that we do have national characteristics in there which differentiate one force from another, but that's based on the way troops were trained. So if troops were trained to operate in a certain fashion, we don't say you have to operate in that fashion. We just give them bonuses if they're doing it. So it encourages you to fight the way that they were trained to fight. So, but that does mean that we are involved in doing quite a lot of research. I mean, somebody asked me this week if I was going to get a Greek army list produced for 1940. Well, I would love to, and if anybody in Greece has the Greek army manuals for the troops who fought in 1940 and would like to translate them for me, I would really love to hear from you, because I I can't speak, read, write Greek. So these are all issues that we have to face up with, and they do take a lot of effort and research. So it's something that we want to get done, and that's going to take a lot of time. So this year is going to be a case of really dotting the I's and crossing the T's on a lot of other stuff. However, what else are we doing? Well, I've just started basing, because I've already gotten painted, for English Civil War. One of the guys at the club has said, let's do an English Civil War campaign, and everybody's gone, hooray! So I'm going, well, does this mean In the Buff is back looming large on the menu? I don't know is the honest answer. I mean, the way I develop rule sets is that I go with where my heart takes me rather than where my head takes me. If I decide that we're going to do English Civil War and I find myself really enjoying it and really enthused and reading and then the project will run and we'll make it happen. If I get to the point like I did last time where I think, look, I've hit a wall here and I just can't get round it, I'm not going to force myself and just shell out mechanically a set of rules that I'm not really committed to. I'll just put it back on the back burner, because I think that's the way you get the best results from what you're trying to do. If you try and say, right, these are going to be the number one money makers, I'm going to tick all these boxes, but I'm not really interested in them, but I'm doing it, I think you'll end up with a set of rules that are mediocre and have no spirit or soul to them. And that's not what I'm about, because I hope people recognise that there's a real commitment in everything we do to apply history to that as well as fun, and that involves an awful lot of back-breaking, slogging research. And if you're not really committed to it, you'll never do that. You'll cut corners, and that's something I don't want to do and won't do. So I hope people feel that there's a benefit in waiting to at least know that when I do produce it, it's something I really do have put my heart and soul into.
Yeah. Oh, so I seem to remember us talking about In the Buff 2-3 years ago, and talking about that that issue of hitting a brick wall as part of the game design was concerned.
That's right. I just hit a wall with cavalry. I wasn't happy with how we were handling English Civil War cavalry. But I feel now, I mean, everything's incremental. Every set of rules we produce, I think, get slightly better than the last, and new ideas come through, and I never stand still with a set of rules. I know and again, this is possible commercial failing, because I know there's a lot of people who make a lot of money by producing rehashes of the same rules. I'm not saying that negatively, because I think it's a fantastic commercial model, because what you're doing is giving people that's well within their comfort zone, because it's there the whole time. I tend not to look at it like that. I'm always looking at ways of changing the mechanisms to make it more streamlined and more challenging, interesting, and multi-faceted and more nuanced, to make the games more interesting but also more sleek and streamlined.
Yeah.
And I think that as we do that, we learn different things each time, and hopefully that allows the next set to get better. And I am feeling that somewhere in there we've done things with cavalry that are going to allow us, and I think maybe it's somewhere with Dux, that what we've been doing with the Raiders and the different cavalry types there, that somewhere in there's some ideas that we can apply to the English Civil War cavalry. And I hope so. So we'll give it another go, and I might hit another wall. It might go back on the back burner, but I hope not, because the figures are looking nice.
Do you ever consider revisiting a rule? I mean, I know you did it with I Ain't Been Shot One. Do you ever consider revisiting a rule set in the light of experience?
I redid I Ain't Been Shot, Mum, because it was one of the first things we ever did, and then it was one of the second things we ever did. And you kind of...
Right.
And you kind of... you learn some lessons along the way and think, I wish I'd done that differently. The one that I'm feeling that about now is sharp practice. I really feel that... I love sharp practice. We played it last night, Terrible Sharp Sword, the American Civil War variant. But I really feel now I could make that really, really streamlined and a bit more sleek in some of the mechanisms. And so, yes, I do feel that. would we go back to them? Yeah, absolutely. If I feel like.
I played my first game of sharp practice 2 or 3 months ago, and I did find myself. I could see how we got from sharp practice through to both Dux and I ain't been shotgun down different forks.
Yeah.
And I could see that there were bits of the second card deck in sharp that I could see in Dux, and was thinking, you could really use something more Dux-like here for the bonus cards.
Yes, you could. Yeah, absolutely. That's precisely what I was thinking last night, and that's one of the things, funnily enough, that's going around in my head about in the buff. Could you use some kind of hand of cards in that? And I haven't thought any than that, because until we get the figures on the table, nothing happens. What happens is we put the figures on the table, literally put them on the table and go, now what? And then we work up from nothing.
Having played quite as much Dux as I have, I can see a Prince Rupert cavalry charge with a fistful of crowns, or whatever you want to call them, suited cards, doing what a Rupert cavalry charge would do.
Yeah, I quite agree. That's we're thinking we're singing from the same hymn sheet here, because it's and at the same time, you can see cards being used against them to get them to do things they don't want to do, or whatever.
Like charge off after the silver and never come back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's something you should actually say, "Ha, you've chased off my rubbish cavalry, but I'm playing this card, and therefore your cavalry will chase off." But I do think that if you're playing this fistful of cards that are really stacking the odds in your favour, maybe for every one of those cards that you play, and I'm making this up as I go along, maybe for every one of those cards that you play, you're increasing the risk of them then buggering off like Rupert would do. So yes, you can apply 4 cards,
or just how many dice worth of move you have before you can stop.
Yeah, that's right. Or anything, any number of things. Blimey, we've got the rules half written, Mike.
Send us a copy when you're ready.
Yeah, let's do the show right here and now, kids. There's any number of things we can do, and definitely, I mean, you're right. When I played sharp practice again last night for the first time in ages, I think, I can see what I did there, and I can see why I didn't do that again. I've used a slightly different mechanism. So, there's several family trees in the Lardy cupboard, and the Ironby Shot Mum is one, and Sharp Practice is the other. And things like Mud and Blood is the son of Sharp Practice, although Napoleonic, flamboyant, bodice-ripping adventures and the First World War are 2 very, very different subject matters. But the core mechanisms are common to those 2, but they're not the subtleties and nuances of them are different. So, for example, in Sharp Practice, if you're firing at an enemy in light cover, you take off, I don't know, a quarter of your dice. If you're firing at one in hard cover, you take off half your dice. Whereas in Through the Mud and the Blood, you don't take off any dice. It's just the effect, the roll for effect, that is changed. So it's a progression from the same concept. And then you've seen Mud and Blood, which the next stage down the family tree is Chain of Command. But, of course, there we're only talking about certain mechanisms such as movement and firing. We're not talking about command and control and bits and pieces like that, which are completely new in their own right. One of the guys at the club is producing a set of rules for revolutionary wars in northern Italy in the late 18th century. Napoleon's first real coming to attention of the world, which he's using a version of the Chain of Command command dice for the way he gets his colonels and brigadiers and generals to activate. But again, it's using the same basic concept, but very different mechanisms. So you can take all these ideas and do something with them, and I think that's the important thing. It's about taking what you've got and trying to improve on it every time, but not throwing out the baby with bathwater. Some mechanisms are just universally good. I mean, the shock mechanism.
Are there any mechanisms you think you've got right now?
Shock. Well, I think I've got a lot of them right until next year, when I might think I can get them even righter. But the shock mechanism, I think, really works. I think the whole concept of leadership and big man I think really works. I mean, funnily enough, people go, oh, a lot of comments about chain of command. There are no big men in this. Didn't like big men. Well, there are big men in it. We just call them leaders. But the change in terminology apparently people approve of. They don't like the term big men.
I still call them big men.
Well, no, maybe it's sort of. I don't know. I'm not going to pass any comment. Moving swiftly on. But yeah, there are things in there, but shock has never changed. Basically, in the way you accumulate shock, and the reason that's never changed is that everybody I know who has been, at the sharp end in action has said that's it. Really works in terms of reflecting the way units just run out of gas, and it also then ties in perfectly with the leadership big men rule, which allows them to reduce that shock. And the better the leader, the more coherent the unit is, and the worse the leader, the more they'll go to pieces. And so I think that's a key mechanism that I'm not looking to get rid of. I've never really met anybody who doesn't like that mechanism, to be fair. I'm sure there's some people. But, that's pays your money, takes your choice, don't you?
Well, I think on that note, Richard, I just want to say it's been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
It's all right. It's always a pleasure. Hopefully it's been enlightening. I always try to tell the truth and, what we're doing and where we're coming from. And I think people appreciate that approach.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you on and to chat about not just Lardy stuff, but everything surrounding gaming. And I've always found you have some some interesting points and ideas.
Contentious, but that's why somebody pays me to write a column, because they know I'm happy to be contentious just for the fun of it. Well, contentious or not, it's been fantastic to have you, Richard, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to speak to you again in the not too distant future. That'll be good. Okay, mate. Nice to speak to you, and nice to speak to you, Mike. Cheers. Yeah, so thanks for coming on the show, and again, yeah. So all at this point, we'll say thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you for Mike for putting in a sterling job as co-presenter, and especially being our I suppose elected Two Fat Lardies expert.
I think junkie might be closer than expert.
So thank you very much for both of being on, and as I say, I hope you found it useful, enlightening, and thank you for listening.
Bye.
Yes, bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you want to know more about Meeples and Miniatures, there are several things you can do. First of all, you can visit the website at www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. If you want to contact the show at all, you can email me at neil@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. You can follow the show on Twitter. Simply look for M&M Podcast, or click the follow us on Twitter button from the website. We also have a group on Facebook. That's the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast Fan Club. Again, follow the link from the website. And finally, if you want to help us to support the show, you can always donate to the podcast by clicking the PayPal button on the donate page, again found on the website. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed the show. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.